month of September has been the month of the roguelikes for me. Between reviewing Fission Superstar X, playing Ziggurat, and one more dungeon for the first time, with reviews still to come of them, and now Hyperspace Dogfights, roguelikes have pretty much taken over my video gaming life. Despite the fact that I've played 4 different roguelikes, each and every one of them have been completely different from each other. And that is exactly why I love the genre. But Hyperspace Dogfights is a game that is not just different, but something utterly unique to all others of the genre. Hyperspace Dogfights is a 2D roguelike shooter that is developed and published by Stefan Whitney under Sleeper Games. It released on Steam May 14th, 2018, and is also available on itch.io, and recently received a big content update, adding in a whole array of new content and a ton of fixes and community requests. Hyperspace Dogfights takes the retro gameplay of the arcade shooter and merges it with the modern day mechanics, creating a roguelike experience that is completely different from all others in its genre, while also keeping the essence of what made arcade shooters so enjoyable, even with its issues. Like most roguelikes and arcade shooters, Hyperspace Dogfights is all about the gameplay. Your objective in the game is to complete a series of waves, each with their own tasks, through a total of 3 different worlds, with the ultimate goal being to obliterate the enemy forces. After a brief tutorial, you are thrown into the deep end, having to defend yourself against oncoming enemies while completing the objective you were given for that wave. The wave's objectives include killing high-ranking enemies, a certain number of enemies, hacking and capturing a supply ship, gaining intelligence on enemy buildings, and so on. As to what objective you receive is completely randomized, and with the large variety it makes every playthrough very different, adding quite a bit of replayability to the game. On top of that, you never know what objective you're going to get next, so there is always an element of surprise and uncertainty as to what exactly you're going to be facing next, adding more intensity to the already chaotic nature of the gameplay. On the final wave of a world, that being wave 6, you will have to face off against one of the zone's numerous bosses, before moving on to the next world, where you'll need to complete another 5 waves and face the boss there. The bosses of Hyperspace Dogfights are what you would expect from a roguelike. They are massive, have lots of powerful weapons, and really put your dodging skills to the test. They're not very creative or original from a design standpoint, often being just massive gunships of some kind, but they do create a sense of fear and really feel like a boss fight. Each time you destroy an enemy, they drop what I can only describe as medals. These medals act as your currency, with higher ranked enemies dropping more valuable medals. After an objective is complete, the player has the option to stay fighting enemies and building up their medal stash while running the risk of taking damage, or moving on to the next wave. Before moving to the next wave, you will enter an intermission, where you will be able to use your medals to open boxes containing supplies such as new weapons, new activatable items, upgrades and health, all of which are randomized, with at least one new crate being available with each intermission between levels. Each world has a mission to capture a supply freighter, and if successful you will gain additional items to purchase. All the items are possible to gain from purchasing these crates have varying rarities, those being common, uncommon, rare and epic, but the better the rarity, the better the item is. Having the intermissions allows for a moment to breathe before heading into combat, while also deciding what purchases to make. With the crates being randomly generated each time, there is always that element of surprise, and you never really know how an item is going to change up the gameplay. Sometimes it goes all your way, other times you'll be struggling, and then you get playthroughs that are just indifferent. It really adds to the replayability of the game, making each run extremely different from the last. If I was to have one complaint about the intermissions of the game, it would be the lack of the ability to save your game. One playthrough from start to finish can take anything from 1 hour to a maximum of 2 hours on average. Indeed, other very popular roguelikes such as The Binding of Isaac don't have mid-game save points, but for a game that's playthrough depending on your playstyle can last up to 2 hours, there should be the ability to save during intermissions. Others have done it, including games like Fission Superstar X and Ziggurat, and it has been a godsend. To have no save points at all in the busy and unpredictable nature of modern day living is a real oversight that limits the game's audience, as not everyone can sit down and play the game for 1 or 2 hours straight uninterrupted. Aside from that, however, the intermissions work well and are always exciting when it comes to seeing what new goodies your hard-earned medals can bring you. As for the combat, it is extremely fast-paced, very bullet dodgy, and quite a lot of fun when you come to grips with controlling the ship. The many weapons, activatable items and upgrades really mix up the gameplay, meaning you need to change your approach to tackling enemies depending on the enemy types and the weapons, items and upgrades available to you. What separates the combat in Hyperspace Dogfights compared to other games is the ability to jump. Essentially, this is where you temporarily warp out of reality, allowing you to pass through enemy fire. This is extremely useful when dealing with overwhelming projectiles when maneuvering isn't going to get you out of it. It takes some time to get the hang of the ability, but once you do, you will be the bullet dodging king. It really adds to the game. One issue I have with the combat is that the game doesn't give a whole lot of time to come to grips with the controls. It took me quite a while to get the hang of the aerial acrobatics that you need in order to survive. Not to mention it takes some time to adjust to the extremely fast pace of the game. It results in you dying often when starting off, especially when trying to figure out the best way to deal with the varying enemies of the game. I think a Binding of Isaac approach to the start of the game would have worked very well here, where the game is set to be relatively easy the first time you play it to help you come to grips with it. In the Binding of Isaac you only face the more basic of bosses and enemies at least for the first attempt or two, before it starts throwing more difficult and complex enemies at you. Because of Hyperspace Dogfights' difficulty being designed where it just throws you into the deep end, it took several hours before I really started to get into it. It's only when you come to grips with the controls and combat do you really begin to appreciate it, and a lot of people simply wouldn't have the patience for that, especially with there being so many other roguelike titles out there today. Aside from that, and once you come to grips with the combat, it is nothing short of adrenaline pumping and exhilarating fun as you begin to dodge bullets left, right and centre and begin performing some incredible aero acrobatics with your ship. And with tons of weapons available to you, each and every playthrough is a very different experience that never gets old. Like any good roguelike game, Hyperspace Dogfights has plenty of unlockables to obtain to help increase the game's overall replayability and longevity. At the start of the game you will only have one of the 5 main ships available to choose from, with you unlocking the others by completing specific tasks. Each ship has its own unique loadout, with one of them consisting of a completely random loadout, meaning you never know what upgrades, weapons and activatable items you are going to have in each playthrough, which can make the game really exciting when the other ships have become a bit boring. Along with the unlocking of new playable ships, there are tons of new weapons, activatable items and upgrades for you to unlock through progressing in the game. Even now, hours into it, I'm only just over the 25% mark of completion. Having all these unlockables results in there always being something new to find and experience. The more you unlock, the more each playthrough varies. The downside to the unlockables is that with the exception of the ships, there is no way of knowing what is required to unlock items. So when it comes to unlocking new content, you simply just have to play the game and attempt to figure things out for yourself, where it seems very random as to how it works. With other roguelikes, even if the game doesn't tell you straight up what you need to unlock something, it is easy to get a good idea on how the unlocks work. Along with that, there is no item database to see all the items you've unlocked and how many you haven't, which is unfortunate. Overall, the gameplay to Hyperspace Dogfights is an exhilarating experience, but only once you get used to it. It's one of those games that you only begin to enjoy a few hours in. Give it time, however, and you're bound to enjoy it. With tons of unlockables including weapons, ships, new zones and much more, there is plenty of content to make the game worth replaying. And if all that, along with fast-paced, chaotic and bullet-dodging action is to your liking, then the gameplay of Hyperspace Dogfights is definitely for you. The atmosphere to Hyperspace Dogfights is alright. It does a great job at incorporating the sci-fi theme of the game, often having techno-like tunes playing throughout the levels. The problem is that the atmosphere is very calm for a game that is so fast-paced and chaotic in nature. The soundtrack doesn't quite fit in and stops the fast-paced, mayhem-filled combat from coming fully alive like it has the potential to do. While the gameplay is excellent and a lot of fun, the lack of a fitting atmosphere just doesn't absorb me into the game as it should have. The music that plays fits well for the intermissions, where you are purchasing new upgrades and the likes, because it is the moments of calm between the storms. But when it comes to the combat, it needs to keep that techno sci-fi theme, but have much more intense and faster paced ambience to get the senses heightened. This is especially the case against bosses, where more urgency, intensity and danger needs to be present in the soundtrack as opposed to its calm theme. It's the kind of ambience you would listen to while chilling and zoning out during an attempt to relax, not when you want to be hyper focused and need high reflexes and hand-eye coordination, which is essential here. It's a shame, as having the right ambience to create the perfect atmosphere for the nature of the gameplay would really make the difference between Hyperspace Dogfights being a good game and a great one. Hyperspace Dogfights has been the toughest roguelike I've had to review yet. The reason for this is due to it being so different in gameplay and aesthetic, along with the difficulty of getting into it. There is certainly no other roguelike, or even game for that matter, quite like it despite its borrowed influences. And it is that uniqueness, along with its excellent fast-paced combat, that really makes this game shine. It certainly has its problems, some more major than others, but the positives definitely outweigh the negatives. Its biggest problem is how hard it is to get into the game. Press on and work your way through that barrier and you will find a really good game with an interesting art style and unique gameplay. Hyperspace Dogfights may not be the hidden gem I was hoping for, but it certainly is an unknown roguelike that deserves a lot more attention than it has received. And with that, I give Hyperspace Dogfights a 7 out of 10. Hyperspace Dogfights is another game that is a perfect example of the video game industry still being full of surprises, as long as you're willing to give the games a chance. After all, just because a game only has a handful of reviews on a store page doesn't mean it's a terrible game.